Hello everyone. Tonight we start with the soot-streaked, sweltering life of the blacksmith, a man who actually created the medieval world. Movies of them striking burning iron in slow motion with sparks floating gloriously through the air are probably familiar to you, but believe me, there was nothing like a dramatic training montage when you were a real medieval blacksmith. The labor was filthy, taxing and blistering, and it was a complete failure in the majority of cases. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to the video before you settle in, but only if you truly like what I do here. You came from a proud, soot-streaked family of medieval blacksmiths. No pompous titles, no land, no crowns. Only the smell of roasted iron baked into your newborn blanket, anvil-shaped blisters, and the family forge. You are required to assist as soon as you can walk into the fire pit without tripping. By the time you're 6 years old, you're officially your father's apprentice, a nice medieval term for a small, unpaid helper with no rights and a face permanently streaked with soot. A dirt floor adjacent to a furnace hot enough to cook your eyebrows, your playground, your toys, and tongs. You're studying how to avoid getting killed by molten metal, while the other village children are skipping stones and chasing chickens. Try not to cry when you make a mistake with the nail again. Guess how hot this is with your hand, and hold the hammer until your arms fall off. The blacksmith, your father, is a scary, muscular man whose only words are grunts, groans, and the phrase, "hit it harder." Decades of exposure to smoke and tax collectors have left him with hands as rough as tree bark and a constant frown. He teaches you everything, including how to stoke the fire, shape iron, and remain silent when a knight disparages your work. You just watch, take in, and follow without inquiry. Mostly because if you ask questions, you'll get a flying horseshoe and be silenced for a week. Holidays? Good concept. Those aren't yours. You don't take breaks, and neither does the forge. Something always needs to be reforged, mended, or sharpened. You quickly discover that leisure time is simply the period of time between jobs, and although you are formally studying a profession, you are actually learning how to tolerate pain, withstand heat, and fall asleep while standing. By the time you're 10, you already have arms strong enough to carry water buckets heavier than your dog, assuming the dog didn't flee from the commotion 2 years ago, smell like iron, and can swear like a miner. Now this is your life. Greetings from the family company. I hope you enjoy smoking, sweating, and having backache from 70 years of age. Before the hammer comes down, don't expect to have a few enjoyable years of playing. In the world of medieval blacksmiths, childhood is not so much a stage as it is a suggestion. You're drafted as soon as you can lift a bucket without falling over. Put games, toys, and the idea of fun out of your mind. Your playroom is a smoke-stained shack with open flames and sharp objects. Your jungle gym? A blazing coal mine beside a rack of tongs. You're about to get an unplanned lesson in how long your skin can sear before your father notices if you make one mistake. Although your work title may be apprentice, it essentially means that you will be reprimanded for doing everything that no one else wants to do. You clean the tools, restack the coal, sweep the floor, pump the bellows, stoke the fire, and attempted to avoid being stabbed by a falling horseshoe. Before breakfast, that is. Food, severe nods, and the occasional grunt of faint approval, which, in blacksmith parlance, indicates that you didn't totally wreck that today, are your pay. The children from the hamlet you used to know are out in the fields, perhaps learning how to milk goats or throwing sticks. Even while they really smell like manure and cheese, you are envious. They may become shepherds or farmers. Sure, lowly occupations, but without the unexpected burns and blazing weaponry. In contrast, you are learning how to do your own nails. Nails. There are many of them. They are repeatedly bent, twisted, and warmed until they are sufficiently straight to support a lord's chicken coop. If you're lucky, your father will point out all of your mistakes before letting you use a hammer on your own. And don't even consider stating that you're exhausted. The forge doesn't contain the phrase, "Burnout is for candles, fatigue is weakness." You continue to swing, perspire, smile, or, at the very least, refrain from crying in public, because you are no longer a child in the eyes of your master, who is also your father. You are undergoing continuous training to become a blacksmith. The forge is your entire life, not simply the place where you labor. It rewires your brain, reshapes your muscles, and takes over your senses. When you reach your teens, it no longer feels like a place. It has the feel of a live thing. You have to feed, manage, and frighten this hot, smoky, and erratic beast. You have the sounds committed to memory. The piercing clang of hammer on metal reverberating like a war drum, the iron hissing in the water, the bellows wheezing. Whether you're half asleep or awake, your body moves in tune with the rhythm, which is akin to a violent medieval symphony. After a while, you become indifferent to the heat. That isn't because things get simpler, rather, it's because you've just come to terms with things like gravity or taxes. You are aware of the embers that burn the fastest, the stones that become too hot to sit on, and the areas of the floor that are covertly attempting to kill your feet. Smoke, not the sun, darkens your skin, your clothing the same leather apron and soot-stained tunic you wear every day, smell of desperation, grease, and charred wool. Although you don't have many possessions, you do have this forge. While not on paper, in actuality, it owns you, but in theory, your father still controls it. The sound of silence begins to fade from your memory. The crackling, clang, and hiss never stop. It's almost eerie when the forge does get quiet. You start to twitch, as if you're missing a beat in a song that you've had to learn since you were a young child. If you have any pals, they hardly ever see you. His presence in the forge is likely to become your default setting. You are the forge, a two-legged extension of steel and fire, and somehow you begin to adore it. You are not a blacksmith, not the blisters and burns, but the sensation when the metal bends to your will, the horseshoe fits, the blade shines, and the shape finally comes out correctly. For a second, you're more than a soot-covered child. You are an essential piece of equipment in the medieval machine, a maker and a crafter. Then the next order comes in, the fire roars once again, and the moment passes. It's time to return to work. Your companions already feel as though they have been under siege by the time they are just beginning to mature into their adolescent limbs. You're becoming stiff, stooped, and scarred, while they're growing taller and stronger. Your arms are thick, but not in the valiant knight-lifting-a-sword manner. Rather, they resemble those of a teenager who has been subjected to anvil attacks on a regular basis. Tragically, your back is bent from hours of straining over the forge and lugging metal. Your knees? When you crouch, they creak. Every few seconds, when you hoist a hammer, your shoulders explode. That now only makes up a portion of your own soundtrack. What about your hands? Let's discuss your hands. You now have iron-tipped claws where you formerly had fingers. Even the Nile couldn't remove the soot stains, blisters, and cracks that cover them. Burns happen every day, cuts are frequent. And what about your fingernails? Half of them are either lost or permanently darkened. Every knuckle already feels cursed, so when someone offers you bread, you grasp it with the same care you would when holding a glass hedgehog. The concept of recuperation time does not exist. Work hard and keep going. Have you twisted your wrist? Make use of the other one. Your elbow is screaming, but it doesn't matter to the forge. Iron doesn't wait patiently for you to sleep. Not to be overlooked is sleep. You would assume that after a day of lugging and hammering, you would faint quickly. However, no, you can't lie still because your muscles hurt so much. After 10 hours of banging, your ears are still ringing, and as if you were fighting ghosts in your sleep, your arms tremble with phantom swings. You experience pain, in unexpected locations. You have a painful odor. Your pain has pain too. What is your father's opinion on this matter? Excellent. You're gaining knowledge. You are, in a weird way. Despite the agony, you're not developing. As a result, you are developing. Like the metal you labor with, you are getting hardened, formed through repetition, pressure, and heat. But don't be misled. Your body feels as though it has already lived 2 lives and died in the middle of each by the time you reach maturity. What's the worst? You have only just begun. Smoke is an issue in most vocations. It's a co-worker at your workplace, and a really impolite one. Not only is the forge hot, it's a chamber for choking, and the delicate scent of ash, burned metal, coal dust, and remorse permeates every breath you take. Congratulations if you can see more than 6 feet in the future. The fire wasn't lit by anyone. No chimney is present. Simply a hole in the roof that allows more smoke to enter than out. You attempt to open a window. No window is present. All you see are the black walls covered in soot, your father's coughing, and the sporadic gusts of wind that force everything into your eyes. Your lungs. Let's assume that they have developed a harmful, long-term relationship with smoke. It burns at first. After that it annoys. After a while it simply becomes the usual. Bursts of coughing, a portion of the cadence. Mucus that is black, not the best. Hey, it's consistent at least. At this point, clean air starts to seem suspect. Your voice even alters. You begin to resemble a 60-year-old goat farmer who consumes boiling tar. Your throat always feels like it's hosting a dust storm. Your breaths are shorter, and your words are scratchier. However, you continue to work, since you must. And it's more than simply fire smoke. Oil vapors from quenching, metal particles from grinding, and occasionally charred wood, burnt leather, or whatever unfortunate thing just fell into the coals are all present. Before midday, you have most likely inhaled 3 different kinds of poison. Protective equipment? Please. The best you can do is to tie a towel across your face. Even so, it becomes sweaty, disgusting, and somehow smells worse than the smoke. When you remove it, breathing becomes a little more difficult. You're not choking on your own perspiration, though. Long-term harm? Naturally. Black lung, asthma, and premature mortality. It's all included in the career package. However, you lack a long-term perspective. You're considering completing the gate hinge before your father discovers its corruption. The air is merely another weight to a medieval blacksmith. Breathing is not necessary for survival. You continue to hammer by breathing. You've gotten to know your instruments well by now, primarily via mutual contempt, suffering, and necessity. Your hammer? It essentially functions as an extension of your arm. You've given it a name. It's cursed by you. Your shoulder now clicks when you raise it, like a ghost maraca, because you've swung it so many times. You're just a sweaty man, standing in a smoke-filled hut without it, though. In addition to making you bleed, the hammer turns you into a blacksmith on a regular basis. Your tongs come next, hot, awkward, and constantly pinching you at the wrong time. More times than you've managed to pick up anything, you've scorched your fingertips. The iron is slipping, the hold breaks. You shout. Your father advises you to grasp it firmly. To give them a lesson, you think about putting them in the fire. Your chisel? It was sharp once. Since you've used it to shape, split, scrape, and occasionally pry open jam doors when your neighbor's lock breaks, it's essentially a blade suggestion now. Awls, rivet sets, punch tools, and files. Your tool bench resembles a torture rack from the Middle Ages. And it kind of is, to be honest. Everything you own has sliced, squeezed, crushed, poked, and impaled you. Now your fingertips have memory. The sight of a new tool makes them cringe. Your apron? It's supposed to keep you safe, and it does. If by protect you mean snagging hot metal fragments and cradling them in a burning embrace, the leather stiffens like a corpse every winter, and it's more burnt than stitched. Nevertheless, you treat these gadgets like family in spite of everything. Every night you line them up, oil them and sharpen them, because if one breaks, you're done. You are unable to work. Earning is not possible. You are unable to eat. Without a tool, there would be no money. Yes, your life depends on your tools. Don't be duped, though. Additionally, they have launched war on your sanity, spine and fingers. We help you survive every day, but we'll also gradually ruin you, they murmur. Yeah, that sounds about right, you reply. Pass the hammer now. Even though you don't have a sword, wear a crown, or command armies, the village would cease to exist by Tuesday without you. Everyone depends on you constantly for everything, since you are the blacksmith. You are the soot-covered, smoke and shame-smelling medieval version of roadside assistance, tech support, and customer service, all into one person. Does the knight require a new blade? You succeed. The plough is broken by the farmer. You make it right. A shepherd's gate latch won't close, a baker's oven door jams, or a monk's bell cracks. Who do you think gets called? Yes, exactly, you. Each and every time, they all act as though you've been waiting for their issue to arise. They arrive in the middle of the game, muddy, entitled, and without warning. They claim you're busy, but would you please just... The word that keeps coming back to you. The finest part, though, comes after. No one ever thanks you. They believe you were born to serve and that it is your job. They nod and leave as though you were the fortunate one, as though it were an honor to fix their rusted bucket at dusk for half a loaf of stale bread. If their hoe operates, their door shuts, or their shield holds. Money? Frequently erratically. By the following market day, they occasionally forget about pledges, sometimes in goods and sometimes in coins. You were compensated by a man using a dead chicken that might be used for soup. No, it wasn't. Additionally, you're the person who fixes issues that don't belong to you. Someone sitting on a gate bent the hinges, you make it right. A dagger broken in a drunken altercation, you make it right. A mysterious iron object that no one can recognize but that needs to be fixed. Yes, you are still there. However, the knight, the priest, or the miller with the extra fat goat are the ones who receive the most plaudits from the hamlet. You. Your background sounds, an essential, a trustworthy instrument, not a human. Here's the trick, though. You are aware, without your work, they couldn't survive for even a week. They would halt their fields. Their houses would collapse, their equines would sag. And even though they might not sing songs about you, your hands silently hold their whole universe together. Peace should be good news, right? There would be no robbers, raiders, or yelling noblemen demanding a new blade by dusk. However, for you, peace is bad for business, because even if you, the blacksmith, may labor on hinges and plows, battle is what really makes the money. Everyone depends on you when there is conflict. Weapons, armor, hundreds of arrowheads. Under the strain of terrified cavalry charges, even horseshoes deteriorate more quickly. You have too much work. It burns brighter in the forge. Coins come rolling in. Your belly is full, even though you're tired, as well as your obligation to the alehouse, forgotten for a moment. The war then comes to an end. A ceasefire is declared by the local lord. The knights halt their advance. And all of a sudden your orders are gone, swords are out, helmets are out. Just a farmer requesting that you sharpen a sickle and perhaps take 3 onions in exchange. Indeed, you are capable of producing household items, cauldrons, handles for doors. Spits are used in cooking. However, it's not very profitable. Everyone wants you to be a wizard at what you do. However, they want to pay you, like a boy, with stability. You simultaneously become a merchant, a beggar, and a negotiator. Negotiating for fair pay like your forge is a market stand. Additionally, don't even consider increasing your costs. People stare at you as if you've just cursed them, but as they say, you're simply bashing metal, as though molten iron was singing church hymns and bending itself into shape. You begin to miss the mayhem. Not the blood, not the villages on fire, but the constant stream of orders, the goal, the hurry. You were important when knights with coin bags and dented shields waited outside your forge. You're now creating keys for doors that nobody locks, repairing pots that ought to have been discarded, repairing tools that are so antiquated that they belong in a museum rather in a field. For everyone else, peace implies rest and safety. It indicates hunger and economic anxiety to you. A part of you also murmurs that you wouldn't mind a minor altercation, even though you'd never say it aloud. Only a small one. A small border dispute, perhaps. Because you eat when swords break. Certain jobs have a conclusion, a distinct finish line. A finished chore followed by relaxation, cheers, or at the very least a hot bowl of stew. Those are not the jobs of blacksmiths. You never finish your work. Not in your fantasies, not now nor tomorrow. 3 things fail after you fix 1. Repair a gate's hinge. The cart's wheel comes loose. Complete a set of nails. Someone arrives and asks for 10 more. However, it will take longer this time and I won't be able to pay you until harvest. You get up early and sleep long after the sun has set behind the trees. Your brain continues to pound even after that. You envision bellows, sparks, and that one client who still owes you a thank you note and half a dozen eggs. Not even the fast jobs are. A twisted rake is held by a villager as they enter. They think it only needs a little tweaking. However, you are aware. That's 2 hours of hammering, reheating, reshaping, and courteously nodding in response to their requests. Is it prepared yet every 5 minutes? Your apprentice shows up right when you think you can finally sit down and possibly have a drink that isn't smoky and lukewarm. The farrier is not feeling well. The horse has to be shoed. You do, of course. Since the blacksmith is you, blacksmith is also the final resort for everyone else around here. The forge is always demanding attention. The fire will not start on its own. If you ignore it, the tools rust. The heat of summer causes your anvil to shift. In the bitter cold of winter, your bellows break. Everything is either in danger of collapsing or is already doing so. The labor continues over the holidays. In theory, Sunday is a day off, unless someone's ox cart breaks on the way to market, of course. Then all of a sudden you're half awake in your apron, hammering on the Lord's Day, praying the priest doesn't pass by. You have no to-do list. That suggests that everything will eventually be crossed off. It doesn't exist. Since blacksmithing isn't a profession, there is a cycle. Work, adjust, do it again, right up until your body fails you. Or it's your hammer. What's the worst? You sort of adore it. Working with a hot iron all day should earn you at least 2 things, right? A satisfying dinner and a restful night's sleep. False. There are no guarantees of food or rest in the life of a medieval blacksmith. They are luxury items, such as pure water or courteous patrons. First, let's discuss food. You burn calories like a renegade horse while working from sunrise to sunset. What do you receive? A gritty bread piece, a bowl of cold pottage, possibly containing the turnip from yesterday. And if it's a special day, perhaps a little salted pork, which isn't the case. You eat while standing, protecting your meal from the forger's ash with one hand while still holding on to the tongs. Meals are hurried. Grunts are used in conversations. And guess what happens if someone knocks on the door in the middle of a bite because their latch is stuck? It is becoming cold in that stew. Eating is not done for enjoyment. To survive, you must eat. Put in some fuel. Hammer out. Let's talk about sleep now, or its ruthless mockery. Your hands hurt when you eventually climb into bed. It feels like your back lost a bar fight. And after listening to iron symphonies all day, your ears are still ringing. Your bed, a sack filled with straw that is either overly flat, too lumpy, or filled with enigmatic, creeping creatures. Your blanket? A sheet of burned wool with a subtle scent of old ale, manufactured smoke, and regret. Additionally, your brain recalls that order you neglected to complete while your eyes close, or that strangely cracked hinge, or the money that was supposed to be paid for that wagon wheel 3 weeks ago but hasn't arrived. Sleep turns into a compromise. You're lying awake, twisting and tossing, trying to figure out how long you can put off repairs before someone comes hammering on your door at the crack of dawn. Not to mention the surprises at midnight. A shoe is thrown by someone's horse. A door is torn from its hinges by a storm. Or before a hunt, a nobleman's blade needs to be sharpened immediately. You obviously don't need to sleep. You learn to get by on snatches and scraps, half naps, stolen bites, and outright defiance. Because productivity takes precedence above sustenance in your world, deadlines prior to falling asleep. Sleeping and eating are not work breaks, they are breaks in between blows of the hammer. You'll sleep when you're permitted, eat when you can, and pray that the fire doesn't run out while you're asleep. At one point, your hands were soft. Once, a long time ago. As a kid, perhaps, they're wrecked now. Your fingers are become tools in and of themselves. They are so calloused, cracked, bloated, and stiff that they hardly feel anything other than pain. You are unable to hold a quill. You have trouble tying your own boots, but with the casual assurance of someone who has been burnt so many times, you can grip red-hot tongs. The meaning of pain has been gone. When you move your hands, every joint pops. It appears that a hammer has robbed your knuckles. Your hands are a blister map, layered like tree rings, old and fresh. Are you having trouble determining the season? Check the blister count, please, over 5. Summer is here, your fingernails are gone. Several times, some were clean, others didn't. You previously suffered a severe thumb crush that left it black for 2 weeks. You continued to work. You simply grumbled more than normal and swapped hands. There are always cuts. Occasionally, the edge is chipped. A file can bite you at times. The iron can fight back at times. Something spills blood every week. You cover it with a piece of scrap cloth, mutter obscenities, and continue working. The burns are more worse. The few are mild. A little reminder that iron is unforgiving. There are worse. The sort that leave scars that speak for themselves, that bubble and sizzle. At this point, you're not even upset about the fact that you've branded yourself more than a cattle farmer. You're simply accustomed to it. The only thing that has improved is your grip strength. Walnuts can be crushed as if they were debts. But agility, that is no longer there. You make mistakes. When your fingers are chilly, they shake. The hands of a 70-year-old knight who lost 3 wars and now rolls bar dice for soup are in your hands at the age of 30. These hands, however, are what sustain you in spite of everything. They fix hinges, shape swords, and carry the hammer that is your reputation. They work, but they ache all the time. Because as long as you can still swing, it doesn't matter how shattered your body is in this life. You don't smell very nice, let's be honest. In fact, you haven't had a fresh scent since you were 5 years old. Your personal scent permanently changed to one of soiled ashtray, burnt bacon, and desperation the moment you were hired as your father's apprentice. You smell like fire, no matter how hard you scrub. Welcome to the life of a blacksmith, forever. Like the forge, you burn all day. Your skin, hair, and clothing are all contaminated by the smoke. Even the smell of your perspiration has changed. It is more akin to smoked meat that has been left out in a warm spring. In principle, you could take a bath. However, you labor 6 days a week while coated in coal dust, grease and soot before the sun is even completely up, and baths are infrequent, and the water is freezing. What's the point then? By breakfast, you would be dirty once more. Your clothing is useless. Every day you dress in the same charred leather apron and charred tunic. Even at the last event, someone poured ale on them before midday, so they haven't been completely cleaned. They now simply cling to your body like a hardened funk's protecting coating. Have you tried any perfumes? Ignore it. It is consumed by the forge after 10 minutes. Near you, flowers wither. Bread stales more quickly. When you pass, cats hiss. What's the worst? People pay attention. As soon as you enter the tavern, the crowd disperses like the Red Sea. The innkeeper is already aware that you should be seated in a corner, preferably close to a window. It's survival, not civility. The human equivalent of a burned fence post is not someone anyone wants to sit next to on a seat. Nevertheless, you accept it. A little embarrassment is preferable to being ignored. You are well known. That's the blacksmith, people say, with a mixture of nasal irritation and reverence. Even though you're not the town's most charming man, you're unquestionably the most fragrant. Besides, you've been working if you smell like fire. If you have been crafting, you will smell like iron. And smelling like leather saturated in sweat and smeared in sorrow and soot? That simply indicates that you are a professional. This is not the life you choose. The iron expectations were handed down like a rusty relic, and the forge selected you through your father's hard hands. You're doing the same now. Your son does not go around in the fields or play with wooden weapons. You mutter, "Don't flinch," while he retrieves coal, pumps the bellows and keeps the tongs steady while sparks fly. He smells of damp burlap and charred metal at the age of 7 or so. You have some guilt, but not much. Since you're not being mean, you're getting him ready. The trade is this, it's survival. You can see how he stares as he watches you swing the hammer, wide-eyed, partly fearful, partly in wonder. You recall that expression. You used to give your father the same one. He looked like a mountain back then. You now see that he was only formed of responsibility and weariness, not stone. The boy learns everything from you, how to use color to measure heat, how to tap rather than slam, how to enjoy metal music. Sometimes you yell more out of habit than rage. Hold it correctly, it's too chilly. Don't cry, it's just a burn. When you can, you try to soften things. A tale beside the fire. When you can afford it, a slice of dried fruit. But in the forge, tenderness is short-lived. Too much work needs to be done. Soon, his hands will resemble yours. Before his voice breaks, his back will hurt. He'll become used to sleeping through ringing ears and quietly waking up before dawn. His clothes will grow out of style, but the burn marks won't, and he'll carry the hammer you can no longer lift when you eventually collapse, knees, shoulders, and lungs included. Some may argue that it is unjust for the cycle to stop. However, things have always been this way, a heritage of survival, steel, and soot. You're transferring a legacy rather than merely a deal. A never-cooling forge. Yes, you raise your son to repeat the entire process. Someone has to keep the fire running, not because you're being nasty. You've lived your entire life swinging too much iron, breathing too little clean air, and standing too close to fire. It was always a matter of when, not if, your body will fail. And it's occurring now. In a storm, your knees creak like wooden doors. You can't get your back to straighten. Once able to bend steel, your fingers now shake as you pick up a cup. Your arms won't respond, yet the forge continues to roar. Every day the hammer feels heavier, as though it knows it's almost time to get out of your hold. You don't die in a spectacular fashion. There's no ballad, no heroic ending. You just slow down. You begin giving your son tusks. You watch more and sit more. For the first time, you find it difficult to recall the answers when he asks you questions. At this point, the locals begin to visit him. They still give you a polite nod as they go by, but they converse with your boy. The calloused hands are now on him. He is still recovering from the burns. You're secretly proud that the pain of the craft has been transferred on new shoulders. You were never rich. You were needed even if you never had any land, literature, or nice clothes. You kept farms operating, gates swinging, wheels turning, and swords sharp. The world moved because of you, even though it didn't thank you very frequently. It's unlikely that you'll reach 50. Not many blacksmiths do. The harm accumulates. The heart is worn out from constant heat and strain. The joints are pounded down like iron on stone, and the lungs are darkened by years of smoking. However, your work remains after you go. Blades at noble hips, nails in church doors, and shod and ready to ride horses. You leave a boy with a hammer, tools, and scars but no titles, and that's sufficient in your universe. They might bury you in a plain grave with a name carved in wood and a forge that lingers in your mind. No statue, no riches. However, every clang that reverberates throughout the hamlet long after you have left is the sound of you continuing to work. Never were you a knight. You didn't wear shiny armor that glinted in the sunlight or ride into combat with flags flying. However, you created that armor. Although you built the plows that sliced the land, you did not cultivate it. Although you forged the oven doors, you did not bake the bread. Although you did not construct the castle, your fire touched every hinge on its gates and every nail in its beams. As a blacksmith, you were. And that meant everything in the medieval world. You stood by your forge, day in and day out, reshaping the world piece by piece, while kings switched crowns and nobility quarreled. The world is held together by 1,000 little details, including rivets, hooks, bracing, buckles, and nothing that attracts attention. Your legacy is silent, but your life was noisy. Your hammer was not the subject of any songs. Your tongs were praised by no bard. However, you were the reason behind every functional wheel, every intact sword, and every barn door that swings rather than falls. People noticed smoke as they passed your forge. They thought it was all because they smelled soot and sweat. But within, a symphony of steel and heat filled the interior, of invention and perseverance. You created civilization, not merely iron. One nail at a time, one horseshoe, one blade, and the fire still burns long after your hands have stopped moving. Your hammer is raised by your son. Your grandchild picks up on the heat. Your identity may be forgotten, but the tools you created endure, handed down from generation to generation. You never received a crown, honor, or celebration. But nothing changed without you. No homes were guarded, no army marched, and no carts rolled. You were the spark blazing beneath the king's tales, the foundation beneath the history books, and it is more important than anything anyone has ever spoken out loud, because you were the silent spark that transformed raw ore into progress in a universe composed of stone, wood, and willpower. You kept the world going, not just a part of it. Alchemy was something far more ancient and sacred, even before it was linked to cloistered European labs and robed mystics muttering over bubbling flasks. The shimmering heat of ancient Egypt, where metamorphosis was a divine concept, ingrained in every aspect of life and death rather than a scientific gimmick, is where it truly began, not medieval Europe. Chemia was the term used by the ancient Egyptians to describe it. It was derived from the word chem, which means black land and described the rich, dark soil that was left behind after the Nile's yearly flooding. However, this had profound spiritual significance and was more than just a poetic moniker for their geography. For the Egyptians, black represented possibilities, wealth, and unprocessed substance that was ready to be changed. Thus, Egypt itself came to represent the transformational force of nature. This would later give rise to the term alchemy or alchemia. However, the preoccupation with alchemy in Egypt was not limited to converting base metals into gold. Alchemy permeated every aspect of ancient Egyptian life. The deceased's body was meticulously preserved, transformed, and prepared for eternity during the mummification ceremony. Priests created holy elixirs at the temples by combining oils, plants, and minerals. It existed in the soil, in the stars, and even in the process of making beer and baking bread. They thought the language of the gods was transformation. Egyptian alchemy was actually always spiritual in nature rather than just physical. You have to comprehend something on the inside before you can change it on the outside. Alchemical writings from various nations would recite this concept over the ages. According to some traditions, Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, magic, and the moon, served as the mentor for these early Egyptian alchemists. Thoth is said to have disclosed the mysteries of creation, metamorphosis, and the soul's afterlife. It was claimed that these truths were inscribed on the emerald tablet, a mysterious artifact. However, we must acknowledge one truth before we can proceed. Alchemy started out as a sacred science of life rather than a gold rush. Everything that followed, from Persia to Paris, would have its origins in this old, fertile region. In Egypt, it was the fire that gave birth to all others. Thoth was the heavenly midwife of alchemy, if it originated in ancient Egypt. The god Thoth was more than merely a god in Egyptian mythology. He was the deity of time, writing, magic, wisdom, and the fundamental principles of the cosmos. Thoth represented balance with the head of an ibis and a moon disk above him, and he was the holy writer of all secret truths in a world fixated on change and order. Myth says that Thoth was not merely a teacher of alchemy, but a living example of it. The Egyptians thought he had written thousands of books that were full of wisdom from God. Mortal eyes were never intended for the majority of these, but history would be altered by one piece of his information: the enigmatic emerald tablet. Like a riddle etched into the very foundations of civilization, whispers of the emerald tablet have reverberated throughout time. The tablet, which was reportedly etched in emerald stone or green crystal, included a brief, poetic inscription that was only a dozen lines long. However, it was thought that the secret to changing matter, soul, and reality itself lay in those lines. It starts with a statement that has plagued intellectuals for generations. Everything above is similar to everything below, and everything below is similar to everything above. The microcosm and the macrocosm are implied to be mirror images by this straightforward statement, which is known as the principle of correspondence. The human soul experiences what occurs in the sky. Changes in the lab have an impact on the universe. The emerald tablet imparted a worldview rather than gold-making techniques. It stated that everything can be improved, exalted, and transformed. The world is not set in stone. The transformation of ignorance into wisdom, disorder into harmony, and the mortal into the divine is not limited to lead into gold. The one thing, the origin of all creation, is also described in the tablet. It emerges from the earth and descends from the sky, taking with it the power of everything. Others viewed this one object as the soul, the ether, or even consciousness itself, while others regarded it as the philosopher's stone. Who could decipher the tablet's contents, however, may have been the biggest mystery. You couldn't just be a scholar, you must have been a seeker. And it was this holy conundrum that Thoth had given that would endure Egypt's downfall and endure throughout time and space like a beacon. To the world, then, to Persia. alchemy persisted when Egypt's golden age came to an end. It moved. It made its way into the hands of another ancient empire, Persia, via trade routes borne by scribes, mystics, and conquerors. However, this was more than just a knowledge transfer. Alchemy itself experienced a metamorphosis in Persia, combining philosophical profundity with spiritual fervor. One of the earliest monotheistic religions in the world, Zoroastrianism, had a significant influence on the foundation of Persian alchemical thinking. The idea of duality, a never-ending conflict between light and dark, truth and deception, purity and corruption, was at its core. In Zoroastrian theology, fire was considered the purest of all elements and was considered sacred rather than merely a symbol. It symbolized divine wisdom and burnt in temples, and the early Persian alchemists' crucibles would be lit by that fire. Though spiritual concepts were ablaze, the first authentic voice of alchemy, which continues to reverberate today, was given by a Greek-Egyptian mystic named Zosimos of Panopolis. Zosimos, who lived in the 3rd or 4th century CE in Roman Egypt, was no typical philosopher. His works combined bizarre mystical excursions with technical descriptions of furnaces, stills, and elixirs. His most well-known dream has him being burned, mutilated, and changed in an alchemical furnace. However, this vision is divine rather than terrifying. It is the purifying of the soul and the metaphorical death of the ego. Alchemy, in Zosimos's opinion, was more than simply a process of altering metals. According to him, the alchemist must undergo transformation. The alchemist had to endure suffering, purification, and transcendence, just as base matter must be broken down before becoming gold. Alchemy, he said, was a mystery of both matter and soul. He was well ahead of his time in introducing the concept of spiritual alchemy. Zosimos uses a lot of odd symbols in his writings. Divine beings emerging from fire, men melting into colored vapors, and lions eating serpents. These notes weren't chemical. The soul's quest for perfection was symbolized by them. Zosimos was also among the first to emphasize that genuine knowledge could not be purchased or committed to memory. You have to earn it. The alchemist's journey was one of self-discovery, discipline, and hardship. His impact would reverberate across continents and ages. One thing was evident despite the fact that many of his texts were misplaced or misinterpreted. Alchemy has evolved beyond its early stages. It had turned into a religion. A new empire and a golden age of learning emerged as the flames of ancient knowledge flared across the remains of Egypt, Greece, and Persia. A great intellectual renaissance took place under the aegis of Islam between the 8th and the 13th centuries. Cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba developed as havens for alchemy, astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy when Europe entered the Dark Ages. Jabir ibn Hayyan, often known as Geber in the West, was the man at the center of this renaissance whose name would go down in folklore. Jabir was more of a combination of a philosopher and a chemist. His contributions to alchemy were so significant that they established the groundwork for modern science itself, earning him the title of Father of Chemistry. Jabir, who worked in the Abbasid Caliphate's courts in the 8th century, viewed alchemy as a methodical, verifiable study rather than as mysticism. He invented laboratory techniques that are still in use today: sublimation, crystallization, and distillation. He used philosophy and scientific experimentation to create new instruments, improve acids, and write more than 100 texts. He did not, however, forsake the craft's spiritual foundations. Not at all. Everything in the universe, according to Jabir, is made up of combinations of the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water, and is endowed with spiritual properties. His system included a sophisticated fusion of symbolism, astrology, and numerology. He believed that every change in the physical world was a reflection of a more profound change in the spirit. Jabir also proposed that the secret of alchemy is mizan, or balance. Metals must be balanced to achieve perfection, just as the body needs to be balanced to stay healthy. Gold was matter in perfect balance, not just a metal, and even the most base metal may be elevated if diligent procedures could bring it into equilibrium. His impact extended beyond the boundaries of Islam. As Jabir's writings spread throughout medieval Europe after being translated into Latin, a number of Western alchemists were inspired to expand on his ideas, many of whom were unaware that they were following in the footsteps of a Persian genius. The most significant advancement in alchemy was made by Jabir ibn Hayyan. Sacred symbolism was no longer the only thing. It was a science, a system, and a method. Nevertheless, it continued to be what it had always been, a roadmap for both heavenly and material change. Europe continued to be shrouded in superstition and spiritual dogmatism, while the Islamic world preserved and advanced the knowledge of the ancients. However, information has a way of spreading, particularly when it is too strong to be suppressed. Alchemy crept westward, piece by piece, smuggled through conquering ink and language. Alexandria, which was once home to the Great Library, Toledo and Córdoba in Islamic Spain, or Al-Andalus, were among the locations where the East-West Bridge was constructed. In these rare instances of intellectual cooperation, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim academics collaborated side by side. Deciphering the writings of Jabir, Zosimos, and Aristotle, translators labored over Arabic manuscripts, bringing lost concepts back to Europe. The continent of Europe was in dire need of knowledge by the 12th century. The uncovering of these old manuscripts was a cultural explosion, particularly in the area of alchemy. However, it wasn't just the useful science of chemistry that showed up. It was a combination of spirit, matter, and meaning. Alchemy in its purest form. Monasteries started concealing odd manuscripts behind holy texts. Monks experimented with metals to purify themselves as well as to purify others. Transmutation, the belief that base metals could turn into gold and that the human soul could do the same, became the focus of European minds in secret rooms and candlelit research. The Assembly of the Philosophers, also known as the Turba Philosophorum, was one of the most important books to make it to Europe. It was a cryptic discussion among ancient sages on the mysteries of nature. Then came the Picatrix, a huge Arabic grimoire that was full with alchemical and astrological symbols. These books conveyed worldviews in addition to recipes, and inquisitive minds were sown by such worldviews. In order to avoid being accused of heresy, the Latin translations of these works spread covertly, frequently passing off as philosophical or religious treatises. Alchemy was dangerous after all. It questioned the established order. Could a peasant become a nobleman if lead could turn into gold? Is it possible for man to become divine? The attraction of alchemy was too great for the suspicious church to ignore. It provided a secret route to excellence that was unaffected by authority or ideology. Europe had seized the lead by the end of the Middle Ages. Once burning in Egypt, Persia, and Baghdad, the flame now flickered in secret societies, castles, and monasteries. Alchemy was on the verge of undergoing another evolution after crossing the threshold. In Europe, alchemy had become practically legendary by the late Middle Ages. It had evolved into a sacred quest rather than merely an intellectual one. And there was just one thing, one concept, and one fixation at the center of that search: the stone of the philosopher. The stone was more than just a chemical. It was a mystery veiled in riddles, concealed in symbols, and encased in allegory. The philosopher's stone became the most sought-after artifact in Western esoteric tradition because it was believed to have the ability to turn base metals into gold and grant immortality through the elusive elixir of life. However, the stone was spiritual rather than physical to those who truly understood alchemy. It was known by a variety of names in alchemical writings. The powder of projection, the red stone, lapis philosophorum. It was described by some as a real red crystalline substance. It was a metaphor for spiritual enlightenment, according to others. However, everyone agreed that it was the secret to the final change. Alchemists held that the cosmos was a living thing that was always trying to get better. Metals were living things as well, developing gradually in the Earth's womb. Simply put, lead was immature gold. Additionally, man may change in the same way that nature does in order to achieve equilibrium. The philosopher's stone was the accelerant of that evolution. European alchemists like Albertus Magnus, Roger Bacon, and later Paracelsus devoted their life to studying the processes of nature in quest of this ultimate truth. They collected rare minerals, studied astrology, constructed furnaces, and composed mysterious writings that were replete with monarchs, dragons, suns, and serpents. All metaphors describe the stages of inner and outer development. The process by which the stone was created was referred to as the magnum opus, or great work. Negredo, the blackening, which represents death, deterioration, and the dissolution of ego, was the first. Albedo, the whitening and purifying, followed. Then citrinitus, the yellowing, lighting. And lastly, rubedo, the stone's emerging, reddening, and rebirth. But why use metaphor to conceal this process? Because alchemists felt that the uninitiated were not designed for true change. Only those who were prepared, both intellectually and spiritually, would be able to see the stone. To look for the stone was to look for excellence. And while many searched for money, the wisest alchemists recognized the only thing worth polishing was the soul. As alchemy established deeper hold in medieval Europe, it began to fade into the shadows. Scholarly discussions in courts and open discourse in temples have suddenly turned into covert activities. There were numerous reasons: political apprehension, religious scrutiny, and the straightforward reality that alchemy's language had evolved into a code that only the initiated could read. With its immense power, the Church recognized both promise and danger in alchemy. While some Christian mystics accepted it, seeing the transmutation of metals as a mirror of Christ's resurrection, others denounced it. It was blasphemous to believe that man could control nature and even attain spiritual enlightenment without from divine grace. Alchemists used symbolism and metaphor to hide their teachings in order to avoid persecution. Alchemy went underground during this time, hiding in coded writings, secret groups, and esoteric symbols that were only understood by insiders. A shadowy fraternity known as the Rosicrucians emerged in the 17th century and professed to possess ancient alchemical knowledge that had been transmitted from Egypt and Arabia. The hidden sciences, heavenly harmony, and spiritual enlightenment were all mentioned in their manifestos. Generations of seekers were inspired by their ideas, which spread like wildfire even though no one could establish their existence. Then came the Freemasons, whose rites have a strong resonance with alchemical thinking despite their origins in stone construction. Inner illumination, metamorphosis, and purification. Whether or not they engaged in physical alchemy, the construction of the ideal self was precisely what their symbolic language aimed to achieve. Alchemy also sought solace in secret books such as the Mutus Liber, which was composed entirely of weird symbolic imagery that conveyed the great accomplishment without using words. The underlying reality of other texts was hidden by their use of green language, which was a combination of puns, wordplay, and poetic double meanings. The alchemist had adopted a dualistic lifestyle, appearing as a scholar, doctor, or monk, while being silent, submissive, and pursuing the divine through fire and metal, spirit and stone. The exact secret that threatened alchemy also maintained it. It smoldered unnoticed, handed down from master to apprentice, generation to generation, like a fire buried under ash. And in these quiet shadows, alchemy continued to evolve. not merely as an early science, but as a living philosophy. One that will soon face its biggest obstacle, the emergence of contemporary chemistry. By the 17th and 18th centuries, a stealthy revolution was emerging, one that would both inherit and bury the legacy of alchemy. It was the Age of Enlightenment. Scholarly halls no longer accepted the mysticism and metaphor that once veiled alchemical philosophy. In its place came a new language, empiricism, logic, and reproducible results. The successor of alchemy had come. It was called chemistry. This wasn't an abrupt execution. The change was gradual and systematic. Many of the earliest chemists were in reality alchemists. They just changed their attention. Measurable change, rather than spiritual perfection or soul conversion, was the new objective. No more dragons and black suns, just beakers, balances, and careful paperwork. Robert Boyle, who is frequently referred to as the father of modern chemistry, was one of the last straws. Boyle presented the case that atoms made up matter, and that chemical reactions could be explained without the use of supernatural forces in his 1661 book, The Skeptical Chemist. He removed alchemy's esoteric terminology without disparaging it. Boyle maintained that natural rules, not allegory, must be used to explain the alchemist's transformational ability. The old understanding of the four elements, earth, air, fire, and water, would soon be refuted by Antoine Lavoisier, who would also uncover the significance of oxygen in combustion. Next would be the periodic table. Laboratories evolved into non-religious knowledge temples. Alchemy was viewed as archaic and a disgrace to legitimate science because of its secret codes and hallowed analogies. Here's the conundrum, though. Alchemy was responsible for the very existence of chemistry. The instruments, the methods, the interest, it all sprang from the furnace of that ancient skill. For chemistry to run, alchemy had walked. Still, the world was changing. Results were required by industrialization, not puzzles. Lodges were not sponsored by governments. Laboratories were. The microscope replaced the philosopher's stone, and the Bunsen burner took the place of the alembic. The sacred had given way to the material. But there was still hope. Alchemy continued to breathe in quiet minds and obscure nooks, not as a science, but as a representation of change, of oneness, of the everlasting dance between spirit and matter. And some people continued to look to alchemy for meaning even as the world turned to chemistry for solutions. Since certain fires never extinguish, under the surface they simply burn. Alchemy never really dead, even though it is no longer found in scientific halls. Rather, it changed, as it always taught that everything has to. What started in Egyptian tombs was polished in Persian fire temples, and was encoded in medieval Europe's secret writings didn't just vanish. It developed into modern spirituality as well as chemistry, psychology, and medicine. Its internal message persisted even after its external form was shed. A new type of alchemist appeared in the 20th century, with a notebook and a dream-filled head rather than a furnace. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung revived alchemy by unearthing its latent wisdom. He maintained that the ancient alchemists were charting the human psyche subconsciously rather than merely changing metals. Depression was the blackening nigredo. Albedo, the whitening, was insight. The emergence of a single, cohesive self was the reddening rubedo. According to Jung, individuation, the process of becoming whole, was the philosopher's stone. As it happened, alchemy has always been about more than just riches. These days, its traces can be seen everywhere, in self-help books that advocate for change, and in tales of heroes who go down into the abyss and emerge transformed. Words like refine, distill, and purify are all echoes of the alchemist's path in the language we employ. The spirit of alchemy permeates science as well. In nuclear reactors, chemists continue to change materials. With the same awe that alchemists once had for ether and quintessence, physicists now discuss dark matter and unified fields. The language has changed, but the hunt for the universe's basic building blocks is still ongoing. However, alchemy's emphasis on wholeness may be its greatest legacy. It never distinguished between mystery and science, or between spirit and matter. It taught that changing oneself is the first step toward changing the world. Every experiment has a sacred question at its core. Through the process, who are you becoming? Alchemy whispers an ancient truth in a world where speed, technology, and the icy precision of statistics rule. In order to fully change something, you must also be willing to change yourself. Thus, the alchemist's fire continues to burn, not in crucibles, but in hearts, while they wait, call, and change. Alchemy was a mirror because it was never only a science. With its surface strewn with tall stone chimneys and undulating hills sculpted by time and wind, Cappadocia initially appears to be a bizarre painting. Most visitors never realize that the true wonder is beneath their feet as they marvel at the odd beauty above. There is a lost civilization beneath this Turkish countryside, a maze of underground cities that stretches for miles. These aren't merely temporary shelters or caverns. Their whole urban structure, including homes, churches, wells, food storage facilities, stables, and even schools, is concealed underneath. Thousands of people are housed in the shadows of the earth, in some that descend up to 18 floors. The most startling aspect? Up until the middle of the 20th century, many of these cities were unknown. In 1963, a man in the town of Derinkuyu tore down a wall in his basement while remodeling his house. Behind it, he discovered a tunnel rather than earth or brick. Another tunnel led to a room, which in turn led to a spiral staircase. By chance, he had discovered an old entrance to one of the world's biggest underground cities. It was as though a whole society had decided to disappear underground, leaving nothing but quiet in its wake. Derinkuyu, however, was only one among several. Archaeologists have discovered hundreds of underground communities, at least 40 significant ones, distributed around Cappadocia over the years, connected by slender passageways and covert escape routes. These burrows weren't just any old ones. They were engineered and planned with purpose. Inside, corridors may be sealed off by enormous stone doors. Fresh air was introduced from the surface by ventilation shafts. Even during siege, fresh water was guaranteed via wells that drew from subterranean aquifers. Why would somebody construct such a complex structure underground? Historians have been troubled by that question for years. There are several theories. Did these cities serve as hiding places for forces that were on the march, monastic havens, hidden places of spiritual refuge? Or did they represent something much older, stranger than hell? One thing is obvious, regardless of the cause. Cappadocia was more than a geographical area. It served as a haven. One planet under another. A place where thousands may dwell completely underground and never leave the surface. Additionally, the story gets stranger the further you walk into these cities. We must first comprehend the region itself in order to comprehend why people constructed towns beneath Cappadocia, because the topography of Cappadocia is not typical. Central Turkey was covered in layers of ash millions of years ago by a series of severe volcanic eruptions. That ash solidified as tough, a porous, mushy rock, a substance that is both robust enough to maintain its shape for generations and light enough to be carved with simple tools. It was molded into odd shapes by wind and rain, chimneys of fairies, towers that are conical. The spires resemble mushrooms. The whole area appeared to be a foreign planet or something torn from a dream. However, ancient people used the granite rather than only admiring it. This volcanic stone was recognized as a gift by the first settlers. Without lumber or bricks, they could cut out houses, chapels, storage spaces, and even whole complexes. Additionally, in contrast to surface houses, These stone rooms remained warm during the bitterly cold winters and cool during the sweltering summers. They carved churches into the faces of cliffs above ground. However, the true magic took place underground. Simple caves were probably where it all started. Little hiding places for storm protection, food storage, or heat escape. But as societies grew and threats increased throughout time, so did those caves. They developed into networks, levels, and interconnected rooms. And the digging continued after it had begun. Whole communities disappeared as the earth carved deeper and deeper, not at random, but on purpose. Stables were connected to wells, rooms to chapels, and residences to kitchens via tunnels. They filtered fresh air through several stories and constructed ventilation tunnels that reached the surface. They even excavated vertical staircases that were both narrow enough to protect and large enough for people and animals. How old these structures might be is what's really amazing. Although the Byzantine era saw the expansion of several underground towns, some archaeologists think that the original levels may have originated in the Hittite Empire or even earlier, circa 2000 BCE, particularly in locations like Derinkuyu and Kemikla. In response to this land's invitation to change, the Cappadocian people shaped it with perseverance, foresight, and survival in mind, not with the aid of machinery. The ground wasn't only a base. It was a castle, a sanctuary, a second sky, but one that was secret and inverted. But from what precisely were they hiding? Next, we investigate that question. There is something remarkable beneath the sleepy town of Derinkuyu, a city, deep beneath the earth, not above it. When a man making minor home renovations in 1963 tore down a wall and discovered a black tunnel that extended beyond view, he discovered a city that no one even knew existed. Chambers were at the end of that passageway. Corridors led from the chambers. From room after room, level to level, staircases wound their way down into the rock until, at last, the explorers were 18 stories below the surface. They had discovered the biggest and deepest underground city in Cappadocia, if not the entire world, Derinkuyu. The discoveries made by archaeologists were astounding. This was neither an emergency shelter nor a makeshift hiding place. Made entirely of volcanic stone, Derinkuyu was a living metropolis. Homes, churches, common kitchens, schools, storage spaces, oil and wine presses, and even a baptismal chamber were all part of it. An estimated 20,000 people might live there, together with their food and cattle. It was remarkably precisely engineered. In the event of an attack, passageways could be sealed off by pushing massive rolling stone doors that resembled millstones. These weren't straightforward blocks. They were almost impossible to pry open from the outside, movable from the inside, and precisely fitting. Fresh air was delivered to the deepest levels by ventilation shafts that slithered upward through the rock. In order to supply water without surfacing, wells were used to access subterranean aquifers. This city was more than just a place to survive, as evidenced by the existence of a mission school with study spaces. It was about community, worship, instruction, and continuity. Here's what, though, makes Derinkuyu so enigmatic. Who erected it originally and why is a mystery to us. Some people think that early Christians who were escaping persecution from the Romans or Arabs extended it. Others contend that the foundations date back thousands of years before Christ, maybe to the Phrygians or even the Hittites. Why take such drastic measures to vanish underground? Was it, as many think, to flee invaders? Did the threat not have a human face? There are no names, inscriptions, or a clear chronology on Derinkuyu, only tunnels, chambers, and inquiries, and a lot of it is still untapped today, because it feels more like something else and less like a city the farther you go. Constructing down is a lot more complicated than constructing up. There is only solid stone and shadow, no sunlight, no scaffolding, no open skies. However, the designers of Cappadocia's underground towns did more than simply excavate. They used extraordinary ingenuity and accuracy to create environments that could sustain thousands of people for months or perhaps years at a period. These cities weren't disorganized caverns filled with fear. They were meticulously designed systems with separate functions at each level, arranged like an onion. Because living quarters were nearer the surface, they could get outside more quickly after danger had passed. Kitchens, workshops, food storage, and animal pens were located on deeper floors, carefully positioned to lower the possibility of contamination or fire spreading across the city. The ventilation system was one of the most clever aspects. In order to allow air to flow through up to 18 underground levels, long vertical shafts were excavated into the rock. Despite being more than 50 meters deep, certain shafts were positioned so that even the lowest rooms could receive fresh air. Just gravity and ingenious design without fans or power. Another essential element for survival was water. Natural aquifers served as the foundation for the cities. Residents wouldn't have to come out for water, even during a siege, because wells could be accessible from within. To keep assailants from poisoning them, well shafts in certain cities were completely walled off from the outside. Additionally, there were communication tunnels that connected to neighboring underground cities and smaller satellite chambers. People or messages could be transported via the earth itself during dangerous times. Additionally, the defenses were straightforward and efficient. Intruders had to approach in single file because to the narrow corridors, door traps that could be lowered, secret passageways into riverbeds or valleys. The rolling stone doors are the most well-known. Huge, circular slabs that could be quickly rolled into position to block a path. They appeared to be a part of the wall from the outside. They served as a last line of defense from within. Every choice and every design led to the same conclusion. The purpose of these cities was survival, for long-term habitation under severe threat, not for days or weeks. Which begs the question, what sort of threat necessitated this degree of planning, and did it ever really disappear? The same perplexing question has been posed by academics for ages. From whom were the inhabitants of Cappadocia hiding? What threat compelled whole populations to burrow underground? To live, not only to shelter. Invaders are implicated in the most popular notion. Empires converged in central Anatolia. The area was continuously threatened by the Romans, the Byzantines, the Persians, and the Assyrians. Christian populations will later be forced to seek underground shelter as a result of Arab attacks during the early Islamic era. It's possible that during these violent outbursts, Derinkuyu and Kaymakla turned into safe havens where residents could hide behind the rock and bide their time until danger passed. However, there is an issue. These subterranean metropolises' depth, intricacy, and sheer size imply they weren't constructed quickly. This was not an act of desperation. Generations of excavation, engineering, and refinement were needed to complete this long-term design. It seems that some of the deepest chambers existed before Christianity. Who then constructed the initial layers? According to some historians, the first tunnels were built about 4,000 years ago during the Hittite Empire. Others speculate that they might have been enlarged by the Phrygians. However, the record becomes silent after these educated guesses. No carvings, no inscriptions, and no concrete proof exist that tell us who first disappeared beneath the surface or what they were fleeing. That is the starting point for the theories. Some people think that these cities were constructed for a purpose other than escaping other people. Solar events, natural disasters, and even ancient conflict that may have contaminated the land and left scars on the heavens. Deeper fringe ideas contend that the cities were constructed as hiding places for extraterrestrial entities, the sort of being mentioned in myths from many cultures. Destroyers, watchers, and sky gods. The thought is alluring. The degree of concealment, the hidden air shafts, the escape routes, and the stone doors give the impression that the builders were attempting to blend in as if their fears were unchanged. It hunted, not simply attacked. These theories are still theoretical, yet they reveal a fundamental enigma. The fundamental question will always remain unsolved, regardless of how many layers archaeologists find. From whom were they hiding? Did it work too? Because sometimes the truth gets darker the more you dig. Imagine spending months or even years completely beneath, rather than just a day. Only stone walls, flickering oil lamps, and the constant silence of life beneath the earth. No sunlight, no open skies. Thousands of people in Cappadocia had to live with this during dangerous times. However, how did people truly live their lives inside these enormous subterranean cities? These areas weren't dead despite the darkness. They had a regimen that was meticulously planned for the survival of the group. Food was prepared in clay ovens, families lived in multi-room compartments, and kitchens were positioned on lower floors to better control smoke. The aroma of freshly baked bread slightly mingled with the musty odor of cattle and stone. There were chapels and cathedrals with elaborate frescoes, altars, and crosses carved onto them. Here, people did more than simply survive. They performed ceremonies, worshipped, and prayed. There were large hallways that reverberated with footsteps and voices, meeting spaces for the group, and classrooms for the kids. Numerous oil lights strewn across the corridors provided illumination. Through ingeniously constructed tunnels that also served as ventilation, smoke was directed. Life here wasn't simple, though. There wasn't much fresh air, there was always darkness, and when it did fall, there was complete silence. Grain was kept in sealed rooms to keep it from spoiling, and water was extracted from deep wells that were dug into aquifers. It appears that life had flavor and ritual even underground, as evidenced by the discovery of wine presses and olive oil vats carved into the rock. The cities were constructed with the long term in mind. They were a prepared reality rather than a final resort. For simpler management and ventilation, livestock, sheep, goats, and chickens were housed in special pens, typically close to the entrance floors. They were there for two reasons: warmth and food. The builders were aware of the psychology of survival in spite of the cramped quarters. Families had privacy thanks to the layout of the rooms, while communal areas fostered a feeling of belonging. Living underground meant more than just staying hidden. It meant protecting a culture, a way of life, and a people. That's a humble idea. Entire civilizations persisted underneath, unseen, while wars raged above. In fire-lit stone chambers, people got married, raised their kids, and grieved for their deceased. Living underground meant living with purpose rather than fear. The underground cities of Cappadocia were a part of something much larger than solitary havens. There is an extensive system of tunnels, chambers, and secret passageways beneath the hills and valleys of this volcanic area that appear to link several cities. It's possible that Derinkuyu, Kemaklu, Oskonak, and other villages were parts of one underground civilization, rather than merely distinct communities. Like veins under skin, some of these tunnels wind for kilometers beneath the countryside. They were probably utilized for covert movement, escape routes, or even moving supplies and communications from one underground complex to another, because they were winding, narrow, and frequently barely wider than a man's shoulders. It is thought that a tunnel of this kind, which is around 9 kilometers long, connects two of the biggest cities, Derinkuyu and Kemaklu. Not only is that amazing engineering, but it also demonstrates a level of coordinated planning that is uncommon in ancient building. If accurate, it implies that several cities may help one another during sieges or emergencies, operating akin to an underground federation. However, these tunnels had defensive as well as utilitarian purposes. They were simple to trap or ambush because they were constructed with numerous bottlenecks, blind twists, and choke spots that required any pursuer to enter one at a time. In order to keep intruders out, Several tunnels were equipped with trapdoors and rollable stone corks. The entire scope of these networks is still unknown, though. They are still finding new pathways. In 2014, a far larger underground complex, possibly even larger than Derinkuyu, was inadvertently discovered beneath Nevşehir. It may have dozens of levels, aqueducts, places of worship, and innumerable unmapped tunnels, according to archaeologists. What was the real purpose of these tunnels? Were easy ways to get out, or the infrastructure of a society designed to remain invisible at all times? As we discover more, we come to understand that Cappadocia's underworld is more than just a set of houses and corridors. It's a system, planned, linked. For thousands of years they have been hidden beneath our feet, and perhaps, just perhaps, there is more out there to find. Entire cities buried intentionally rather than by time, because the ground in Cappadocia protects secrets rather than merely concealing them. The underground towns of Cappadocia are still a mystery, despite decades of research and excavation. The questions resound more loudly than ever, despite the silence of the stone walls. Not only how, but why they were constructed. Furthermore, myths and alternative hypotheses quickly fill the gaps left by historical explanations. The actual age of ancient settlements is one of the most persistent mysteries. Their significant expansion is attributed by conventional archaeology to the Byzantine era, when Christians sought safety from advancing armies. The oldest tunnels and chambers, however, may be far older, 4,000 years or more, according to some researchers. If so, what threat would have compelled humans to go underground so long ago? Now for the theories. According to some, these underground civilizations served as temporary refugees during ancient climate disasters, solar flares, volcanic winters, enormous floods, and natural disasters. The self-sufficient, concealed and sealed city layout may be seen as long-term survival bunkers, ready for environmental collapse. Others seek explanations from the cosmos. Theorists of ancient astronauts contend that these cities might have been constructed by early societies as a means of concealment from what they referred to be gods, beings that swooped down from the sky and reigned with terrifying might. Did the underground cities serve as a barrier against extraterrestrial life? According to a local tale, giants used to prowl the surface and push people below. Others describe foes that arrived with blazing eyes and flames from the heavens. These could seem like analogies or recollections warped by centuries of oral tradition to the modern ear. However, they allude to something so dreadful that it may drive entire civilizations to the ground. The symbolism of the earth itself is also the subject of certain beliefs. According to certain old traditions, going underground symbolizes a journey into the underworld, a symbolic death and rebirth. Were these cities places of spiritual refuge, locations where ritual transformation takes place, or were they intentionally forgotten rather than abandoned? In actuality, no one explanation can account for everything. The age, the scale, the accuracy. It is not entirely consistent with our current historical context. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect about it is that, because history isn't always the only thing that is hidden, it is the periphery of something that we were never supposed to comprehend. Visitors visiting Cappadocia today stroll past fairy chimneys that flame orange in the evening sun, across wind-carved valleys, and through surreal landscapes. Overhead, hot air balloons float silently. However, the ground is hollow beneath their feet. Beneath the splendor is a darkly etched world that has endured for thousands of years. Tourists can now explore the underground cities. In order to wait for danger to pass, visitors must journey through low-arched tunnels, descend tight stairwells, and stand in rooms where humans formerly lived in quiet. Still, just a small portion has been discovered. There are still some sealed chambers. A few passageways give way to darkness. There are doorways that lead nowhere. Or so it appears. They are more than just ruins. They serve as evidence. Evidence that people will go to any lengths to ensure their survival, to keep their kids safe, to protect their convictions when the world becomes hostile, to disappear. They also left a sort of message written in stone rather than words when they vanished. We are unaware of their names, their stories are unknown to us. However, we are aware of this. They were visionaries, engineers, and planners. They produced something that would be resilient to millennia of quiet. Perhaps something was never supposed to be discovered. History isn't always visible, as Cappadocia teaches us. The most profound facts are occasionally purposefully hidden, concealed from the victors. Concealed from those who might be interested, perhaps hidden from time itself. And what's left? Mysterious? The rolling stone door's flawless fit is mysterious. The air shafts that continue to draw wind from the deep are mysterious. There is mystery in the kilometers of uncharted tunnels that are still undiscovered and gloomy. Perhaps we shall never know the true function of Cappadocia's underground realm. It might not be meant to be. However, you sense an ancient stirring as you pass through those corridors, the silence pressing in and the weight of the rock overhead, a presence, a murmur of endurance, not of dread. Because the people of Cappadocia looked down and decided to live when the world above was in disarray, in the absence of light. Together. It appears that the earth has done a good job of keeping their secret. Sleep was not an escape from reality in the ancient world. It served as a gateway to something more profound. Dreams were not written off as irrational ideas or hallucinations. They received great attention. In actuality, they were seen as messages, frequently direct communications from gods or spirits, occasionally warnings and occasionally prophecies. The distinction between the material and spiritual realms was not clear to ancient societies. It had pores, and that line thinned in sleep. Dreaming was a holy, enigmatic, and frequently frightening experience. The divine could enter the human mind during those silent, exposed hours of the night, and what it shouted or murmured may determine the fate of a city, the decision of a king, or the right of a priest. Dreams were highly valued in nearly every early culture, from the Mesopotamian river valleys to the Egyptian temples and Greek colleges. People thought they were being visited by actual forces with actual repercussions, not by fiction. War could be predicted by dreams. They might expose treachery. They might demand sacrifice or grant healing. Not only was it considered stupid to ignore a strong dream, it was risky. Therefore, the dreamer was more than just a sleeper. They served as a messenger, a container that momentarily let cosmic realities in. In certain instances, the dreamer was selected by the gods to become a prophet. Dream interpretation was the focus of entire professions. The symbols that appeared in the night were deciphered by priests, shamans, oracles, and seers. In a dream, a snake could represent change or portend death. Depending on the situation, a rising sun could portend either deceit or success. The belief was universal, but the codes varied from culture to culture. Dreams were important. Parts of such ancient wisdom are still present today. We talk of waking up to a discovery or pursuing our dreams. Dreams, however, were not poetic expressions in the ancient world. Sacred information, warnings and maps were conveyed while the conscious mind was asleep. Before Freud, before REM cycles, before science attempted to quantify what the ancients already feared and admired, this was the world. For them, to go through the dream world was to walk with the gods, and the dream world was real. The Sumerians, who lived in Mesopotamia more than 5,000 years ago, were the first civilization to record dreams in writing. They did not consider dreams to be arbitrary pictures. For them, dreams were frequently intricate, symbolic, and profoundly significant direct messages from the god. Archaeologists discovered clay tablets engraved with dreams, some political, some personal, among the remnants of their towns. Interpreting dreams was nothing new. It was a disciplined practice that was valued, taught, and researched. Men educated to read the messages of the gods. Sumerian rulers employed court dream interpreters whose interpretations may affect the destiny of entire cities. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest literary masterpieces in the world, contains one of the most well-known instances of this ancient dream culture. Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu both had intense, symbolic dreams in it. Gilgamesh has visions of celestial wars and collapsing mountains before setting out on their perilous quest to defeat the monster Humbaba. His mother and priests interpret these visions as veiled predictions and divine warnings. They did not disregard these dreams. They were consulted for divine direction. The Sumerians thought that dreams may be either empty or just reflections of the day, or they could be sent by the gods to guide or instruct. The knowledge of a priest or diviner, people who could decipher omens, symbols, and patterns concealed in the imagery of sleep, was necessary to distinguish which was which. Priests or even kings would sleep in special rooms found in temples in the hopes of seeing visions from God. The Sumerians may have been the first to use this ceremonial rite, which was later dubbed incubation in other cultures. Sometimes even more reliable than waking signals, these hallowed dreams were regarded as oracles. Dreams could also act as political instruments. A king could increase his legitimacy or defend important choices by claiming to have had divine dreams. In a dream, the gods taught me that it was power, not just spirituality. Dreams were the language of the Sumerian universe, which was full with meaning. Every picture had cosmic meaning, whether it was of a storm, a lion, or a falling star. And to dream was to listen in a place where gods lived among humans. Ignoring those dreams was tantamount to inviting the wrath of heaven. For the ancient Egyptians, dreams were portals rather than merely messages, routes to the gods, hints about the afterlife, and occasionally guidance for the living. Sleep was more than just a period of relaxation in a society preoccupied with eternity. It was a practice for dying, and dreams were messages from the afterlife. Egyptian writings demonstrate that dreams were considered both deeply personal and powerfully predictive. The Egyptians divided dreams into two categories, just like the Sumerians did. False dreams that were deceptive or the result of physical imbalance, and truth dreams that were delivered by the gods or spirits to counsel, heal, or warn. It was known that dream incubation was practiced in temples devoted to deities such as Thoth and Serapis. In the hopes of obtaining heavenly dreams, worshippers would sleep inside temple walls. Priests would frequently record, analyze, and even carve these temple dreams into stone. In certain instances, a person may experience healing in their dreams in addition to visions. One of the most remarkable items is the Ramesside Dream Book, dating to roughly 1300 BCE. In essence, this papyrus scroll is a list of dream symbols and their interpretations. It provides an interpretation for each of the more than 100 dreams it lists. For instance, a guy will gain control over his adversaries if he sees himself consuming crocodile flesh. Dreaming of sipping warm beer portends coming sadness, according to another passage. They took these interpretations seriously. Pharaohs, generals, and priests all sought the wisdom of dream interpreters who worked as middlemen between the dreamer and the divine. Dreams were also associated with the soul, or vehicle, in Egyptian mythology. The automobile was thought to depart from the body and journey to other regions while you slept. Dreams were what it saw there. These were occasionally encounters with gods delivering messages or visions of departed loved ones. Dreams were sometimes interpreted as visitation from evil spirits, and spells of protection were chanted to ward off these forces. Dreams can even be found in grave inscriptions. Kings spoke of how gods appeared to them in the middle of the night and gave them advice for their legacy or heavenly approval for their rule. Dreams were revelations rather than illusions in the country of pyramids and gods, and to dream was to temporarily enter the everlasting realm. Dreams inhabited a position between philosophy, mythology, and medicine in ancient Greece. Dreams were more than just personal to the Greeks. Gods, heroes, or even entities from the underworld conveyed these cosmic messages. But unlike prior civilizations, the Greeks also began to explore why humans dream, planting the earliest seeds of psychological thought. The Asclepion, a healing temple devoted to the deity Asclepius, the divine healer, was the most revered location for dream revelation in Greece. Pilgrims came from around the Mediterranean to sleep inside these sanctuaries in a process called incubation. To get their bodies and souls ready for healing dreams, they would bathe, fast, pray, and perhaps make sacrifices before bed. In these dreams, it was thought that Asclepius himself would arrive, diagnosing their illness or recommending a treatment, sometimes even performing dream surgery. Based on what the gods revealed, temple priests known as therapeuti deciphered the dreams and administered cures. This combination of mysticism and medicine was well respected and apparently effective. Inscriptions praising the gods for miraculous healings covered the walls of Asclepions. In Greece, however, dreams had more purposes than just healing. They were both prophetic and political. Zeus is the direct source of dreams in Homer's epics. The deity influences Agamemnon's military tactics in the Iliad by sending him a false dream. Penelope describes two gates of dreams in the Odyssey, one of ivory, which is where lies come from, and one of horn, which is where real dreams come from. Dream interpretation gained respect as a profession. Aristotle and Heraclitus were among the philosophers who wondered about the nature of dreams and whether they were the result of heavenly inspiration or merely the soul's stirrings. The Onero Critica, a 5-book guide on deciphering dreams according to profession, gender, position, and symbolism, was written by 2nd-century dream analyst Artemidorus of Daldus. For centuries, his work was cited. The Greeks held that the soul relaxed its hold on the body when we slept, drifting in a transitional condition that allowed it to see more profound realities. Dreams were never pointless, whether they were inspired by the gods or the result of introspection. For the Greeks, dreaming meant briefly touching the divine mind, not only seeing images. In the past, dreams were frequently regarded as predictions rather than merely mental reflections. Time unwound in the dream state, allowing the future to seep into the present, according to several cultures. Sometimes dreaming meant seeing fate before it came, and that knowledge came with a lot of power and a lot of duty. History is replete with kings, generals, and prophets who followed their dreams in Sumer, Egypt, and Greece. One accurate reading could alter the path of history, while one incorrect interpretation could cost a kingdom. Dreams of falling stars, blood-red rivers, gloomy suns, or celestial omens were seen as portents of impending conflict or catastrophe in Mesopotamia. Priests documented these dreams in great detail in an effort to spot trends that could indicate an empire's future. Not only were these documents kept, but they were also reviewed in emergency situations. Dreams were also considered divine warnings by the Egyptians. Famously, Pharaoh Thutmose Thorf claimed that he had a dream in which the Sphinx spoke to him and offered him kingship in exchange for clearing the desert sand from its body. That dream guaranteed his legitimacy in the public's eyes, regardless of whether it was based on fact or political narrative. Prophetic dreams were acted out in Greek political chambers and on the battlefield. Leaders looked for omens before making important choices, either by consulting oracles like those at Delphi, who frequently dreamed as part of their rites, or by incubating dreams. Before capturing Persia, Alexander the Great was reported to have dreamed of the Egyptian deity Serapis, seeing it as a sign of divine favor. Prophecy, however, was not limited to monarchs. The general public also thought that dreams may predict death, disease, marriage, or childbirth. There were thousands of these interpretations in Artemidorus's Onirocritica. Dreaming about flight, a sudden shift in fortune, losing teeth, or a death in the family. People who believed in prophetic dreams felt as though they had connection to the divine and could see the hidden strands of fate. However, it also caused anxiousness. What if a warning went unnoticed? What if you didn't get it? Sleep was not a private matter in a world where gods whispered in dreams. It was an exchange with fate. Herbs and blades were not always used for healing in the ancient world. Dreams were often the source of it. Many ancient cultures had dream temples, which were sacred healing sanctuaries. The sick here sought more than simply medicine. They prayed for heavenly help. And the first step in the cure was sleep, not medications. The most well-known of these were the Asclepians, who worshipped the god of healing, Asclepius, in ancient Greece. However, this was not just a Greek invention. Dreams were also thought to provide spiritual purification or reveal cures by ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilizations. There was no respite from sickness in these temples. They served as locations to meet the healer, frequently via a heavenly vision. It was referred to as incubation. Before sleeping down in a hallowed chamber, generally at night, a pilgrim would cleanse their body by fasting, bathing, or performing a ceremonial sacrifice. The objective was straightforward but profound: to intentionally dream, to allow heavenly communion with the self. Gods or spirits might show up in these dreams, giving counsel, healing, or even undergoing dream surgery. In their dreams, several people saw snakes, holy representations of Asclepius, curving around their bodies. Others witnessed divine hands, touching them or bathing them in light. Following their awakening, temple priests, trained dream interpreters, would listen, translate, and, in accordance with the dream, recommend activities. Sometimes it involved walking a certain path, drinking a special brew, or making a sacrifice to show gratitude. The dream itself was seen as the remedy in certain situations. These temples were not remote nor outlying. They were visited by thousands of people. Miracle recovery is mentioned in inscriptions carved into the walls of temples. Pain was relieved, fevers were stopped, and blindness was cured. The power of belief and the dream was indisputable, regardless of whether the healings were spiritual, psychosomatic, or physical. Dream healing transcended cultural boundaries. In search of comparable nightly revelations, many traveled to the temples of Imhotep or Serapis in Egypt. Temples dedicated to Gula, the goddess of medicine, provided areas for ritual slumber and dream interpretation in Mesopotamia. All of these rituals were bound together by a common belief. The soul and body were intertwined, and dreams were the best way for the soul to communicate. The body wasn't the only thing that was healed. It has to do with balancing the divine and the human. Dreams were more than simply stories in these places of solitude. They served as medicine. Dreams were not just a source of healing or prophecy in the ancient world. The deceased were able to communicate there as well. Dreams, according to many ancient civilizations, were a unique and precious moment when the line separating the living from the dead became thinner. Dreaming about a loved one who has passed away was not considered a straightforward way to deal with sadness or remember them. Many people thought that the deceased's ghost had actually returned with warnings, messages, or unfulfilled demands. These dream experiences were intense, poignant, and profoundly meaningful. Dreams were believed to provide a direct connection to the underworld in Egypt, where belief in the afterlife was fundamental. It was thought that the soul, or ka, could freely move while we slept and even visit the deceased. A deceased family member showing up in a dream could indicate that they were unhappy, that they needed offerings, or that they were just trying to provide instruction. In the hopes that their request would be granted in a dream, Egyptians occasionally penned letters to the deceased and placed them in tombs or shrines, pleading for protection or assistance. Dream experiences with the dead were regarded with respect and prudence in Mesopotamia. Dream visitations may be an indication that something was wrong because it was thought that the dead retained their power in the afterlife. Maybe an unmet commitment or a forgotten funeral custom. Ritual cleanses or offerings were frequently made to make amends after these nightmares. Dreams of the dead were likewise taken seriously by the Greeks. Odysseus goes into the underworld in Homer's Odyssey and converses with the souls of the fallen, a scene that many people thought could occur while they were asleep. According to the philosopher Heraclitus, the sleeping turn aside each into a world of his own, but the waking have one world in common. The dead could creep through that inner world. Many societies, even outside of Europe and the Middle East, shared the belief that dreams were their language and that the deceased were not really gone. When a lost parent or child's voice spoke in the night, it wasn't poetic. Rather, it was genuine. Sleep was not a place to be forgotten by the ancients. It was a place where the past might still linger and occasionally beg to be remembered. Dreams were puzzles rather than merely messages to ancient societies. Dreams were thought to include coded language from the divine and were full of symbolism, weird animals, inexplicable happenings, and celestial signals. It was not easy to interpret them. Training, intuition, and frequently ritual were needed. Professional dream interpreters functioned similarly to priests or shamans in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece. They were able to discern between a real dream and a meaningless one, analyzed enormous quantities of dream data, and committed symbol meanings to memory. Their interpretations might have an impact on medicine, public politics, and even military strategy. Some dream symbols recurred repeatedly across cultures, but they were rarely literal. In one dream, a snake could represent danger. In another, it could represent transformation. The sight of fire may portend either purification or devastation. Flying could represent a desire to escape something in the real world, or the soul releasing itself from earthly responsibilities. Hundreds of these symbols were described in Egyptian dream books. A drowning dream could be a harbinger of an impending emotional storm. Being blind could portend a harsh reality that is hidden in plain sight, or a spiritual enlightenment. These weren't conjectures, they belonged to a huge, long-standing and generations-old language of symbols. The Oneirocritica is a 5-volume treatise of dream analysis that was assembled in Greece by Artemidorus of Daldus. He made it clear that not everyone could interpret dreams. The context was important. A sailor's idea of a flood signified something quite different from that of a farmer. A fairly current notion for the 2nd century, the Oneirocritica is among the first known works to propose that dream meaning is shaped by personal experience. Divination was also linked to dream interpretation. It was believed that dreams were a single strand in a network of signs, omens, and religious messages. To make sense of what they had seen, dreamers could make ceremonial offerings, consult oracles, or draw lots. Some even kept dream journals written on clay or papyrus, which they shared with their community in addition to using for personal insight. Symbols were more than just subconscious pictures to the ancient people. They were keys, a murmured component of a holy language in slumber. Furthermore, realizing that language meant discovering the secrets of the soul, the forces of fate, and the will of the gods. A dream was more than just a story to the ancients. It was a coded message from the stars. These days, dreams are frequently dismissed as brief snatches, odd visions that are soon forgotten once we wake up, or at most, inspiration for artists and therapists. However, dreams were much more than just mental chatter to the ancients. They were revered, disciplined, and sacrosanct. They provided direction, healing, access to the afterlife, and heavenly glimpses. Dreams were entwined into governance, religion, and medicine, and they were a part of existence itself. What then took place? Dreams were recategorized when rationalism and science gained power, especially in the post-Enlightenment West. They turned into neuronal byproducts rather than messengers from the gods, emotional processing, memory fragments, or electrical impulses. The holy turned into a medical condition. The chemical replaced the metaphorical. However, dreams continue to be important in times of loss, transition, or profound insight. We continue to look for significance in them. Closure might be found in a dream about a departed loved one. Recurrent nightmares may be a sign of stress or an unpleasant reality. Dreams have power even if we no longer refer to them as divine, and modern psychology, starting with Freud and Jung, attempted to recover some of that ancient understanding. The ancients realized that life and the dream realm are intertwined. It is a mirror that reflects something greater and timeless in addition to our aspirations and anxieties. Dreams provided something that society was unable to supply during the day, whether it was the voice of a parent who had been buried for a long time, a warning about the impending storm, or a god speaking from the dark. An exchange with the unknown. Perhaps that is what we have lost. The humility to pay attention to the messages that sleep may be attempting to convey. There was one notion that held true throughout civilization and time. Dreams are not arbitrary. They're doors. Furthermore, the question is not if they exist, but rather if we are prepared to go through them. We hear the same murmur in every old temple, in every tablet and scroll. Listen carefully. Shut your eyes to comprehend the world, not to forget it, because we could just hear what the Sumerians, Egyptians, and Greeks already understood in the stillness of the night, when the sounds of the outside world subside. That dreams are not mental reflections. They are the soul's language.